Well, one of the songs from that album, it was going to get discussed whether it was on your list or mine. It was going to be on this top 10, and that is A Little Less Like Hell.
I saw the interview today. Sure, I guess it was okay. I laughed at the funny parts. Rogan can sell an asshole or fart. The part where the dictator dies, to be honest, made me sad inside. Like when everyone broke into song the day we killed Osama bin Laden. Now I understand the relief, 'cause I was right there in the street with a t-shirt over my mouth, watching all the ashes come down. But what I'll never understand is why, regardless of how hard we try, we need somebody on the cross just to make up for the things we lost. Tell me who I gotta talk to. Tell me who I gotta kill just to make this place feel a little less like hell.
A very poignant song written 4 years ago, and unfortunately still just as relevant as ever, given what's going on in our country right now. But I mean, who are we kidding? This has been going on for, decades. The song is just, it's filled with references of, 9/11 and just racism towards President Obama. Eric Garner gets mentioned in one of the verses. Of course, the gentleman who first said, "I can't breathe," while a police officer had him pinned down, and
while a police officer murdered him.
Yeah, selling cigarettes, allegedly, which he, denied. This song, there's a lot going on there, and this was one of your picks. So, obviously you're proud of, what you were saying here as an artist.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not proud of it. I'm ashamed that I have to sing it. I'd rather sing about, my daddy issues, because that's what artists like to do. They like to talk about themselves, and there's no denying that. That's just what art is. It's it's an extension of the ego. But it's disgusting to have to sing about these things because they still exist. I spent a lot of time doing activism in my new projects, which is a band called Broken Baby that I'm in with Amber, and working for a record label and running a record label. And, we spent a lot of time doing activism for social justice, for,
awesome.
And I think that was kind of the beginning of, there was another song earlier in the Dan Wells catalog where we kind of sort of vaguely talked about political unrest. But I think that, kind of zeroing in on, the way that black and brown people are treated in America, specifically by the police and also by systemic racism, was something that started to become, sadly, through my own privilege, I couldn't see it until, it was far too late for so many, of our brothers and sisters. But, it was part of that time in my life, I think, when I had sort of let go of the Damwells and I was inspired to write these new songs. And I started to become aware in fundamental ways of just how distorted reality or just how distorted the perception of reality is in America. this is kind of the only, like, talking about songs, like, that's fine, but talking about these issues, I think, is really the only thing I honestly care about anymore, because as a songwriter, I've kind of retired. I think of songwriting and writing songs as a tool of activism.
Okay.
I think of, whether it's activism, specifically for racial injustice, or whether it's, trying to help offer something into the world that, will relieve people of anxiety. I think of songs like that. I don't think I'm going to sit down with a fancy producer in 10 years and write my country record.
Sure.
That's not something that interests me, and I think that at that moment in my career, when I started writing those songs, A Little Less Like Hell and the songs from that album, it became very apparent to me that I had moved beyond a certain kind of songwriting, or at least I'd moved beyond a certain kind of songwriting that had no other intention other than to serve my own ego.
Okay.
So I think that was kind of the beginning of it, and I do consider myself a retired songwriter, in that I don't write songs for my own sake. I mean, they wind up becoming, sort of therapeutic, which I embrace. Therapeutic for me, but I think the impetus for doing it is no longer I'm a songwriter, I need to write songs, and maybe that will change, but. I think ultimately that was the song and the album where that fundamental shift first became apparent.
Okay. And it's one of those songs that musically, if you're not paying attention to, the lyrics, and like we said, some people just, have music on in the background, and it's like, oh, this is kind of a, funky, poppy, Fleetwood Mac-y type of vibe, and then you can't ignore the lyrics once you get to a certain part of the song, because if you weren't paying attention, you get slapped in the face with a word you don't hear in a lot of songs coming from a white musician. Obviously you're quoting.
That's right.
But there is an inward drop in there.
I watched Obama's speech on YouTube. I don't have TV. What he was asking for seemed to me to be pretty reasonable. When he was done, they clapped, which reminded me of watching C-SPAN in my mother's bed, 'cause she could keep the monsters out of my head. And I feel we've come away from summer and those darker days, but it's so hard to forget the black man who was killed for selling cigarettes. And at the bottom of the YouTube page of Obama's speech, there were so many comments made, and more than 4 or 5 said they wish that a nigger would die. Tell me who I've got to talk.
I've always wondered, did you have reservation actually saying that in the song?
Yeah, of course, I still do, and I'm still not totally sure it was the right decision.
Okay.
A lot of this whole process that I think many white Americans are going through, though painfully slow, is understanding, fundamentally understanding the impact of white supremacy on black and brown people in America. And I think we understand it in the vague terms, like burning crosses and lynchings and, and watching police murder, Eric Gardner, or watching police officers murder George Floyd. That's something that I think, anybody with any type of empathy can understand and
Sure.
get behind. But there's a big problem with white people in America, and it's whiteness. Whiteness is a disease, and it blinds people from the ability to see and empathize on a much deeper level with what other people are going through. And that's a really big problem, because that is what systemic racism is. It's something where the machine keeps churning without your intercession. You don't need to be in the driver's seat. You know what I mean? We don't need to have, so many people are, focus their energies on Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a symptom of a system. He is not the master pulling the levers. It will continue that way without him, just the same way that it continued when Obama was president. Yeah. Obviously to a much less obvious and brutal degree, but I think when I use that word, again, I was quoting what I, to give some reference. It's a part of the song where I'm talking about a speech that Obama gave, and it was on YouTube, and there were a bunch of comments, and the comments were, horribly racist and terrible, and it was people who didn't hide their identities using the N-word against him. And I thought at the time, and I, I'm sort of split about it, but I thought at the time that, because a lot of what I am trying to do is, in making activism music, is not trying to say to people, you need to do this, you need to go do this. I do say that occasionally with Broken Baby, because the sort of messaging of Broken Baby is different in that it's a more aggressive alternative punk band. But I think it's important to use manipulation in music to convince people that they should be paying attention to something, and then when they do, they have some sort of enlightenment. Okay. And I think what you said earlier is like you're right on the money. I used purposefully a style of music that I knew would be appealing to white people and to people who are probably not as engaged in politics as they should be, or rather in obvious empathetic issues that they should be, to get their attention, so that they would put it on in the background and tap their foot or whatever. I mean, it's so vastly different from anything that I had done before in my catalog that, I'm surprised that no one has uncovered this before. It's like, it's such an obvious, and I've made no deception about borrowing from other artists. And I mentioned before borrowing, different kind of like chords or choral structures or tempos or ideas from, like that is what songwriting is. Exactly. It's not high art. Right. It's not high art. So it's not like you're supposed to just come up with some sort of new, kind of pop. It's all basically pop music, rock and roll or whatever. So what I was trying to do was to utilize that, both in a conscious and subconscious way, but to utilize what being a hack. I'm a hack. I can take something that someone has done and I can turn it into something that's new and my own thing. And I was like, I'm pretty good at that. I'm going to use that in this capacity to make something that's, sort of generically appealing in these ways that you mentioned, like, Fleetwood Mac or whatever, other music that appeals to white people, to have a message embedded in it and manipulate them into maybe coming to an understanding about something. And that's what I thought maybe that quoting the N-word from that YouTube thing, I thought that, going that final distance and quoting that, in much the same way that John Lennon said, woman is the N-word of the world, right. Is to make people turn their heads and be like, what did he just say? Because I think that's sadly the only way you're going to get people to engage sometimes in finding real empathy for taking up these issues. I mean, if somebody was standing on your fiance's neck, right, like we wouldn't be talking about it. Right, you know what I mean? Right. You would be protecting her with everything that you have at your disposal. So this is what I have at my disposal. I don't know if I'd be much good in a fist fight against Derek Chauvin, but I can certainly try to write a song or affect change in the ways that I know how, with the the skills that I have. So that was really, though maybe I wasn't totally aware of it at the time, that was the beginning of starting to understand what my future as a songwriter would be.
Yeah, well said.
Tell me